What's up everybody? Time for another game theory video, doing all this deep dive into footsies and hitboxes and hurtboxes. Remember, if you like the videos, like, sub, silly, comment, share. Support the channel if you want. If I run out of breath, I'm just tired from doctor stuff, so body's kicking my ass. So anyway, this again, deep dive into hurtboxes and hitboxes and footsies in general. And so I want to show some things talking about, again, how footsies changed and everything like that, and just look at fireballs from Street Fighter 2 to Street Fighter Alpha, right? So this might be interesting. Definitely a much more nerdy conversation, right? But kind of interesting, right? So we looked at, in the original Street Fighter 2, you couldn't poke with the fireball. Of course, there was the speed of the game, which would have made it hard. But remember, Ryu didn't have long-range pokes, which is why, if we skip ahead, we had to use the short. That was kind of your force field footsies, why footsies came to be. But even just look at Street Fighter 2 up here above. Look at Ryu's where his hurt box is. It's like basically to his knee. But once you get the Championship Edition, look, it goes past his knee. It's like in the middle of his foot. In such a small little change, you know what I mean? If we look back here, it was here and then it was there. Such a small little change can have a drastic impact on a match. You think about Ryu, he has the shortest range pokes a lot of times, and you think about Street Fighter, right? But to compensate for that, his pokes had a lot of quotation marks priority. They didn't have a lot of hurt box. But his fireball, you know what I mean? You're like, well, fuck, what am I going to do? I can't poke with the fireball because my limb extends. But now versus some of these footsies, it goes back, right? And of course, back in the day, we didn't talk about hitboxes and hurtboxes and everything like that. We just thought, oh, hey, maybe the move is faster, which it was faster as well. But, you know what I mean? Pretty interesting. And then once we get to a game like Super, we see the hurtbox is, still back at his foot right there, Oops, sorry. Let's go back to the... Oh, I'm really tired, dude. Body's killing me. Goes right there, right? So that helps during footsies. And again, you got to remember, when you talk about footsies and foot games, right? You're aiming at the opponent's feet. And this is so important to remember because in Street Fighter 2, a lot of poking attacks can't hit you ducking. Like, this is a concept people have to understand. Just even though Ryu's hurt box is still the same right here, 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 this little drastic difference, that little square of difference is very important when you're aiming at the feet, because you always want to be aiming at the guy's feet. Otherwise, he can just duck everything. Quotation marks. Now, of course, there were some characters that had pokes that could hit you ducking. And then, you think even once you got to Super Turbo, more pokes started hitting you ducking. But this is another reason why you could say that the fireball is a poke, right? Because besides Street Fighter 2, where the fireball is so slow, you know what I mean? Once we get to games like, Hyper Fighting Turbo, then Super Turbo, where Ryu has a poke that hits you ducking. It's fast. It can be used at that mid-range to, if you think about that sort of mindset of, say, basically, if you think about the mindset of, say, Super Street Fighter 2 Ryu to, say, maybe Alpha 2 Ryu, you red fireball everything, right? Quotation marks. You want to red fireball everything. Super Ryu to Street Fighter Alpha 2 Ryu, that might be some sort of a generic way to use it, right? And of course, we also have this here. You can see the box of, he has the little shield. And the shield actually doesn't make the fireball that much bigger. You know what I mean? But if we go to show here, right? So if you were to look at the pictures, we have that little crosshair, right? And the crosshair goes to the pink here originally. But then once you get to like Super, it's just that little smidge extra on each side, right? And then he has like an extra frame of the fireball where it's a little bit bigger. And then if you were to do a red fireball, it has an extra trail end, right? But again, you got to think even a smidge little difference can make a big difference sometimes, right? So I don't know if you can see it, right? Look at the crosshairs. Crosshair doesn't go to the pink, crosses over the pink, right? Then this has a couple extra frames because he has that extra frame of this, the shield and that. Whereas I think Ken is missing a frame of an extra big fireball, I think it is, right? And then he's got a little bit of a extra trail end here that a normal fireball does not have. But again, that's pretty important because remember, you only aim at the only, not every character, not every character, but if you're thinking about Ryu, yeah, of course, if you're definitely thinking about Ryu, traditional footsies Ryu, I mean, right? And then an interesting thing, we go to Alpha, but look at Alpha. Alpha actually adds it to more of a regular Street Fighter 2 Ryu. But we're going to get to that in a second, right? So here's what we have right here. Street Fighter 2 Ryu. Boom, at his knee. After that, Championship Edition, again, just that little bit is important when you're thinking about when you're playing neutral, playing footsies, you're aiming at the guy's feet, right? It's a little bit bigger. Because again, let's go at this. Now let's look at footsies because this is why I want to deep dive into, say, Alpha, because it really did start changing in Super Turbo. And then, Alpha and all this kind of thing. So we have original Street Fighter 2 Ryu up to Super, right? Footsies is your sort of your force field attack, right? Ryu doesn't have long range, but his footsies, it's that little invincible sort of move, so to speak, right? Then once you got the Super Turbo, boom. Well, boy, you literally cut off half his leg. That's crazy, right? But then again, I guess if we think about Super Turbo Ryu has Rush Fierce that can augment his style. He has his Rush Strong that can augment his style. It gives him an overhead in the first place, which is the first time in history of Street Fighter, I guess, you know what I mean? Other characters had overheads, but you know what I mean? Now the character can't duck everything all the time, right? So even though Ryu's footsies is a little bit worse, there's still reason for the character to, be on their guard, right? Now you can't duck everything, right? And then if we get to Alpha, again, Alpha is even worse. Alpha, look at that little stubby foot. He hasn't had his growth spurt yet. He's still got red hair. He hasn't become the man. He hasn't become the man yet. I miss brown gloves. I like brown glove Ryu, a little bit of bangs in his hair, his face. Back when Ryu was a fucking sex symbol. Back when Ryu looked like he could get laid. You know what I mean? I don't know why the fuck does Sakura want to fuck Ryu? Ryu's he looks like a monkey, but anyway. I digress. And then, of course, we think about Alpha. So we're thinking about Alpha, and you're like, wow, well, wait, the Fireball is worse, right? Fireballs, you could say, perhaps, is a poke. It's part of your neutral, right? So Fireball is worse. I think the Fireball in the original Street Fighter Alpha, again, my frame data is really bad. I'm not a frame data nerd. I think the Fireball might be quicker release than Super Turbo. I'm sure someone will have to correct me. You know what I mean? But I think it might be a little bit quicker. But the hitboxes, obviously, right? He doesn't have that little pullback effect. And that's why I said I made this an entire video dedicated to this move because it's a very interesting move serendipitously, perhaps in the grand scheme of Street Fighter. Ryu stand forward, right? And it's interesting because this blue box right here does not go to his foot. And I talked about how if we're thinking about footsies, right, there's this idea, if we're talking about how footsies affects neutral and everything like that in Street Fighter 2, how you might not even want to press back. You have those little ranges where you just want your guy to stand still. Because if he even presses back during footsies, proximity guard, that can affect the whole flow of the match, so to speak. It actually gives the aggressor a sort of fake advantage, even if the guy doesn't block, right? So we're thinking about Ryu. Ryu's footsies are now worse in Street Fighter Alpha. But he has this stand, although he cannot check the same way with the duck short, he can now check other opponents' footsies with a new move of his that he did not have before, that also you cannot duck, right? His stand forward. Because, if you recall, and I've done videos about this, Street Fighter Alpha, and again, we didn't know about hurt boxes and hitboxes back then, and these are one of the only times that I think this stuff is actually relevant to look at, because otherwise, I think a lot of people just use it to sound smart. But in terms of if you're actually doing a deep dive, I think it can be sort of interesting, right? But normally, I would say don't worry about frame data and hitboxes and hurt boxes because you're overcomplicating things, and that's why I don't care if people say priority, because if you're using your brain, you know what you're talking about. But if we looked at hurt boxes and hitboxes, in Alpha, they actually started adding, see the blue box goes to his shoulder? Well, now the blue box is all the way over here. And that's pretty interesting if you think like it would be fascinating to talk to a Capcom employee who was ever actually balancing Street Fighter to see if this stuff was done on purpose. You would assume maybe it was, because then you're like, oh, so I have these footsie battles that Ryu can get in. And they started giving characters a little bit more aggressive hurt boxes during footsies that would extend a little bit, which perfectly allowed you then, so say during footsies, well, I can fucking karate chop your head with my foot. Axe kick right to the head. And I said that was one of the weird things about Alpha, or Alpha 2, is then Alpha 2 just put the whole blue thing there. And it's like, so then you just get hit when you do it, right? And it's like, okay, so he pulls back, but then once you attack, he gets hit. So, it's like a very kind of clusterfuck move. But, I'm sure some people would be like, oh, they just purposely, it's a mistake that they didn't put the blue box there in Street Fighter Alpha 1. But I think from an interesting perspective is to think that it's actually on purpose. It's on purpose exactly because they made some of Ryu's neutral and footsies worse by making his fireball not be able to check footsies as well. By not giving him, he can't check footsies the same way with lights. But now he has an attack that can hit you ducking. And we've now given characters extending hurt boxes to allow this attack to work just for those situations, which is pretty fascinating, I think, right? Because you gotta remember he still has hop kick too, and they gave him hop kick in Alpha 1 as well, which is another move to beat footsies, right? To go over foot games, footsies, whatever you want to call it, right? Now, the one problem with this is it does allow certain moves that, and I don't know, again, if this is on purpose. It would be interesting to see, again, if a Capcom employee ever's like, I did this on purpose. But it does allow certain things that normally Ryu stand fierce. This isn't Street Fighter 6. If an attack is not aimed at you, it's not hitting you like Street Fighter 6, you know what I mean? This would normally go over you. As you can see, it's not going to hit him. But because of that, Alpha 1 is a game that, again, Alpha 1 is a interesting, I don't know why, sometimes people think that I think Alpha 1 is my favorite game or Kana's Revenge is my favorite game. I don't think that. I just think it has interesting things and interesting quirks if you are able to think about video games on a deeper level, that's all. You know what I mean? It's a quirky game. And normally that would not hit, but because they added these extra hurt boxes to extend a little bit, it does allow the game has some weird hard reads. Like certain characters that you wouldn't think of, say, Charlie with his stand fears, Ryu with his stand fears. You wouldn't think he'd be able to, check you a low poke. But he can poke some, or he can check some footsies with a hard call out with the stand fierce. Some characters can do that in Alpha 1. Which, and then again, another interesting about Alpha 1 is Dan does not have straight hitboxes though in Alpha 1. Besides on his fireball, which is strange, but his footsies, Dan's footsies, do not have straight hitboxes on them, or hurt boxes. Isn't that kind of weird? It's pretty, like I said, it's kind of like fascinating when you actually think about it. But anyway, and and there is and again, I guess it is a double-edged sword because, you think that you don't, and I've always said, like, I've made videos exactly about Ryu's hop kick because it's such a conundrum of a move that has to be treated properly because it augments Ryu's style if you're thinking about traditional footsies, like to such a extreme degree, you know what I mean? So I can see, why maybe some people, I guess I've never actually heard anybody say they hate the hop kick, but I could fathom why somebody might not like Ryu's hop kick if you're thinking about it from a traditional Street Fighter sort of aspect. But again, I think it's kind of interesting if you think about that. So we have all those little different things here. I know kind of a very deep kind of conversation that most people probably have never been able to wrap their head around if you're thinking about fighting games on a deeper level like that. And I want to do a video talking about why someone's saying like they hate hitboxes and hurt boxes and everything like that, and if that they would rather have priority. And I would actually say no. I actually like hitboxes and hurt boxes. If I was making Street Fighter 2, I would keep Ryu like this. I think that's fine, to be honest with you. I don't think that's a problem. I think that's interesting that other characters have longer range attacks. You know what I mean? But Ryu, although he has shorter range like that, you know what I mean? That's why it's more quotation marks. It has that, like, it's almost like an invincible limb. I think that's interesting, right? I think it's interesting that, you know, lights, you know, just kind of like if you're a real guy, hey, jab, 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 keeping the guy out like in a fight, right? Because, you know, if you give him too much time to get in, boom, haymaker, uppercut, whatever, you know, trying to put, I don't think it's that weird, to be honest, that lights have a lot of such high priority. Again, someone's going to kill me for saying that during the ground game. I don't think that's bad. But yeah, I want to, and plus, you know, it's funny, like you could also say that maybe Capcom was thinking, you know, Super Turbo, it's like this. You could think that Alpha, you're like, well, maybe there's chain combos you can light, and you don't want to be able to have a move that has such high priority to make people mad, to be able to get like a combo off of it or something like that. But you got to remember, if you're thinking about where you're checking with the stand short in the first place, even if the original Street Fighter 2 did have chain combos, where you're checking, where it's at its most powerful, if you were to hit somebody at max range, you're not going to be chaining it into a full fucking chain combo in the first place. So if that's your mindset, that would be your argument against me. Well, I just proved you wrong with what I just said. So, but yeah, I got to do another video talking about hitboxes and hurtboxes and why I think they're more interesting than actual priority. And I know I did a video about it for Alpha showing some stuff too, because even if you just look at hitboxes and hurtboxes, they can be misleading in times, right? But, you know, sometimes you get that, just that, again, I've used example like Adon's Duck Fierce and Alpha 1. That doesn't look like that good of a move, but in a real match, that move actually has a lot of fucking priority, right? And I think that's where an interesting thing comes. Like I've always said about hitboxes and hurtboxes, and I guess I haven't just made it for Alpha. I've made it for so many fucking years talking about Street Fighter, but little small differences, even in something that can seem redundant, can have a huge effect on a match. And I think that's more interesting than a priority. This has to win, you know. But yeah. Remember, if you like the videos, like, sub, silly, comment, share, support the channel if you want. I did buy a webcam recently with some donation money, so hopefully that comes in and hopefully that works and doesn't look like a piece of shit. So thanks to the people that support the channel. Again, if you ever super chat, PayPal, super like, whatever the fuck, you know what I mean. I do appreciate it, dudes. The end.